Welcome to another Scare Radio video. Don't forget to share this across all social media as it helps channels as small as me get discovered by others and YouTube algorithm to like me. Love you guys. It was a dark and stormy night, and Emily was driving home alone on a remote, winding road in the countryside. She had just visited her parents and was feeling content and relaxed until the rain started to come down harder and the wind began to pick up. As she drove on, Emily noticed that the road was becoming more and more treacherous, with deep puddles forming on the surface and the windscreen wipers struggling to clear the rain. Just as she rounded a bend, she saw something move in the darkness ahead. It was a figure, dressed in black, standing in the middle of the road. Emily slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. She hit the figure with a sickening thud. Panicked and shaking, she got out of the car to check on the person she had hit. But when she reached the figure, she saw that it wasn't a person at all. It was a scarecrow, knocked over by the wind. Emily breathed a sigh of relief and got back into her car, trying to calm herself down. But as she turned the key in the ignition, she realized that her car wouldn't start. Alone in the middle of nowhere, and with no phone signal, Emily had no choice but to get out of the car and start walking. She had no idea how far she was from the nearest town, but she knew that she couldn't stay in the car all night. The rain was coming down even harder now, and Emily could barely see in front of her. She stumbled through the darkness, her heart racing with fear. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustling of the wind, the patter of raindrops, the distant howl of a dog. As she walked, Emily realized that she was lost. She had no idea where she was or which direction she should be heading in. The darkness seemed to be closing in on her, suffocating her with its weight. Just as Emily was starting to give up hope, she saw a light in the distance. It was a small cottage, nestled in a clearing in the woods. Relieved and grateful, she picked up her pace and headed towards the light. As she drew closer, Emily could hear strange noises coming from inside the cottage. It sounded like someone was crying or moaning. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but the rain was coming down harder than ever now, and she had no choice. When Emily reached the cottage, she saw that the door was ajar. She pushed it open tentatively and stepped inside. It was dark, but she could make out a figure lying on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. The figure was moaning softly, and Emily realized with a start that it was a woman. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond, but kept moaning softly. Emily approached her cautiously, her heart racing. But as she got closer, she realized that something was wrong. The woman's eyes were empty and lifeless, and her skin was cold to the touch. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, there lies a small town by the name of Pine Creek. It was a quaint little place where everyone knew each other and nothing ever seemed to change. That is, until one fateful night when a group of teenagers decided to venture out into the woods for a night of camping. The group consisted of 4 teenagers: Sarah, the popular girl who always had to be the center of attention; Mike, the jock who was always up for an adventure; John, the quiet and reserved one who preferred to keep to himself; and Rachel, the shy girl who was always looking to fit in with the group. As they made their way deeper into the woods, they stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. Despite their better judgment, they decided to set up camp inside for the night. As the sun began to set, they lit a fire and settled in for the evening. It wasn't long before strange things started happening. They heard eerie noises outside the cabin, and shadows danced on the walls. Sarah tried to shrug it off, but Mike was getting increasingly worried. He suggested they pack up and leave, but John and Rachel wanted to stay and explore the cabin. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences continued. The fire would flicker and die down, only to suddenly burst back to life with a roar. The floorboards creaked and groaned under their weight, and whispers seemed to echo through the empty halls. Eventually, they all settled down to sleep, but it was a restless night. They each had their own nightmares, but one in particular stood out. Sarah dreamt that she was being chased through the woods by a figure with glowing red eyes. She woke up screaming, but when she opened her eyes, she saw the same glowing red eyes staring back at her from the darkness outside. They were all shaken by the experience, and they decided to leave the cabin immediately. But when they stepped outside, they found themselves lost in the woods. The trees seemed to shift and move, as if they were alive, and the path that they had followed to the cabin was nowhere to be found. As they wandered deeper into the woods, they came across a clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated house. They hesitated for a moment, but then decided to investigate. Inside the house, they found a room filled with strange artifacts, old books, strange symbols, and jars filled with strange liquids. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror. They stared at it for a moment, but then Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. Her reflection in the mirror was twisted and distorted, and she saw the same glowing red eyes staring back at her. They all ran out of the house as fast as they could, but they soon realized that they were being followed. Something was chasing them through the woods, and they could hear it getting closer and closer. They stumbled and fell, their hearts pounding in their chests, but they kept running until they came to a cliff edge. Below them was a dark abyss, and they could hear the thing that was chasing them getting closer and closer. They had no choice but to jump off the cliff, hoping that they would survive the fall. When they woke up, they were lying on the ground in the middle of the woods. They looked around, but they couldn't find any sign of a cabin, the clearing, or the old house. They stumbled their way back to Pine Creek, shaken and traumatized by their experience. They never spoke of that night again, but they all knew that something had followed them out of the woods, and for the rest of their lives, they could. Once upon a time, there was a small village nestled in a deep valley surrounded by dense forests. The villagers were happy and content, living a peaceful life. However, as the village grew, strange things started to happen. People began disappearing without a trace, and the villagers heard eerie whispers and strange noises in the night. They were frightened and didn't know what to do. One day, a young woman named Anna went missing. Her family and friends searched the village, but there was no sign of her. Days turned into weeks, and the villagers started to give up hope. But then, one night, Anna's sister, Maria, woke up to find her sister standing at the foot of her bed. Anna looked pale and translucent, and her eyes were black as coal. She didn't say anything and simply vanished into thin air. The next day, Maria gathered the villagers and told them what she had seen. They were skeptical at first, but then other villagers came forward with their own stories of seeing strange apparitions in the night. Determined to solve the mystery, the villagers went to the wise old woman who lived on the outskirts of the forest. She had lived in the village her whole life and was rumored to have knowledge of the supernatural. The wise woman listened to the villagers' stories and nodded her head in understanding. She told them that their village was cursed by a powerful evil spirit that had been awoken by their growing population. The only way to break the curse, she said, was to offer a sacrifice to the spirit. The villagers were hesitant, but they knew they had no other choice. They drew straws, and it was decided that the sacrifice would be a young boy named Peter. On the night of the sacrifice, the villagers gathered around the boy as he trembled in fear. They placed him in the center of the village, where the spirit was said to appear. As the villagers chanted and prayed, a dark mist began to form around them. The mist grew thicker and thicker until it enveloped Peter and dragged him down into the earth. The villagers watched in horror as the mist dissipated, and there was no sign of Peter. They were relieved that the curse had been lifted, but they couldn't help feeling guilty for what they had done. The village returned to normal, but the memory of what they had done lingered in their minds. The villagers couldn't forget the sacrifice they had made, and they wondered if they had truly done the right thing. Years went by, and the villagers passed on their stories to their children and grandchildren. The village became known as a place of dark magic and evil spirits, and people avoided it at all costs. But every now and then, on a quiet night, the villagers could still hear the whispers of the spirits that haunted their village, a reminder of the sacrifice they had made to keep their home safe.